Welcome back, guys. So, moved along a little bit from where we left off. As you can see, we've got the decking done. Now, I was going to originally film it, but there are a couple of reasons why I didn't. One was there isn't very many decals. Upper wing roundels, rear fuselage roundels, code letter, tail flash, and serial number. So, actually not a lot of decals. The other thing is that although they have settled down very nicely, the rear fuselage decals were particularly fragile, so we say. So I've gone through 2 sets of roundels to get those on the fuselage. I have used a couple of the kit decals for the wing stencil data, but there really wasn't much to put on, so that you wouldn't have gotten much value out of seeing me put 2 or 3 decals on. However, decals have gone down. I did use a combination of Micro Industries, Micro Industries Set and Sol, Micro Set and Micro Sol, and I also used Mr. Hobby Mark Setter and Mark Softer, just if they're a bit more stronger. But we got them down to get the rivet lines conformed. I actually did run a rivet wheel over the decals because they were struggling to conform to the rivets, so they've basically been riveted, but they all work pretty well. So once we were decaled, I have sealed it all in with a coat of Tamiya semi-gloss varnish, the acrylic, and then if we turn it underneath, there we go. There is just a few bits of stencil data under the wings, and that's it. So that's that done. I've test fitted the floats. They fit quite nicely on both ends. What else have I done? I have completed the depth charges, and I have painted the propellers. I'll zoom you in for this, or I'll come close to the camera. We've completed the waist guns and put the photo etch splinter shield on the front, and I have made up the bracing struts for the wingtip floats. So that's pretty much everything ready to go for final assembly. So what we need to think about now is weathering. Now, as I've said before, this particular aircraft operated from RAF Revell in the Shetland Islands, and for those that don't know where that is, Shetland Islands sit on the 60th parallel. So we're at a place called 60 degree north. Sumber is further north. Well, so Solomvo, sorry, is further north than the 60 degree parallel. So we are very high up on the globe. The weather is very temperate. There's lots of gales, lots of salt in the air. In the summer, there's lots of sunshine. In the winter, there is very little sunshine. And these aircrafts were subject to some very harsh conditions, and there was quite a number of Catalinas actually lost at RAF Solomvo at their moorings due to severe weather. They were overwhelmed and sank, and there's 1 or 2 of them, well, the remains of 1 or 2 of them still on the harbour floor because they were never raised. They were deemed unrecoverable. They were that badly damaged when they were sunk. So these aircraft were pretty heavily well, there's the opportunity to pretty heavily weather them. I am of a mind to sympathetically weather it because that's my taste. So what am I going to do? Well, we're going to have a combination of oils to highlight the panel lines or accentuate the panel lines, and to add a bit more shading to the colors, and we're going to use, well, my usual technique of airbrushing the exhaust stains. They weren't very heavy, to be fair. I've seen photographs where you can hardly see them at all. but we'll put a little bit of exhaust staining in. There was, however, quite a lot of oil staining, certainly running back from the radial engines, and then there's obviously repairs to oil staining on the wings, so it should be quite an interesting thing to do. Right, so for the upper surfaces, I'm going to use a combination of Abteilungs smoke and cream brown, and mixing these two together makes a really nice dirty grey colour. Pretty much, see there, that's probably a third to 2/3, a third of the cream brown to 2/3 of the smoke. And to thin these oil colours, you can use any good quality odourless thinners. I tend just to use, if I can, the AK's odourless thinners. These are getting really quite old, but they're due for what I need them to do. And then for the underside, if I do the top side first, because we're working with a dark colour first, and then what I do is I'll lighten it up with some titanium white to make it more of a lighter grey colour. So pouring a little bit of thinners in an empty Tamiya paint jar. We'll just start mixing the two colours together. Don't put a lot of thinners in to start with, because you do want the colours to mix, and you don't want it to be too runny, because you do want it to work its way into the panel lines and rivet marks. So you're kind of making almost an oil sludge wash. Definitely not a panel line thinner consistency. You want it to have some viscosity about it, just so it's got that ability to grip. Pretty bit thin there, yeah, thick, sorry. Right. Now this makes a lovely dark grey colour, which will naturally go nicely between the two different camouflage colours we've got. We do need to mix it well together to make sure you blend it well. So there's the colour. It's a little bit darker than the grey, but maybe not quite dark enough, I think. So we're going to go and get a bit more. We can tint it down if we want to make it stronger. Put a bit of ivory black in it. So this is Winsor & Newton Ivory Black. So you're just putting a tiny piece, because it's quite a strong black. It's a good oil paint, is Winsor & Newton. And that's certainly bringing the colour down. Make sure we mix it very, very well. It's probably really boring to see me do this, but this is what I do, so I'm trying to show you everything I do. Right, that's taken the colour down quite a bit, actually. That's good. So we're now going to have the contrast we're looking for from the paints. Now, there are modelers that will use slightly different tones for different camouflages. All fine, well and good. I personally just use the one for all. So now I think if I paint that on, you can see that going down. What I'll try and do is we'll zoom you in a bit. There we go. Perfect. And that's focused, hopefully. Yeah. Right, so this is how we do it. So just a nice settle coat over all the detail. If you want to go slightly heavier on where the panel lines are and slightly lighter where just the rivet lines are, that's entirely up to yourself. But I'll just go along and basically map out all the pan lines and all the rivet lines. It does take a little time, but it's time well spent. Now, since I painted the varnish on this aircraft, it's actually stood for a week, and it's good to give the acrylic varnish that time to cure up and harden up, because if it's remotely soft, just putting a little bit more thinners in just to help it sink down into the panel line, into the detail. Yeah, if the varnish is remotely soft, then the oil paint will grip into it and it's going to be an absolute nightmare to get off. So you really want to make sure your base varnish is fully cured up and resistant to the chemicals in the oils eating into it and ruining your paint finish that we've worked pretty hard to get where we're at. So I'm just painting over the panels, and most of this is going to be rubbed off when we clean it away, but what we just want is all the rivet lines and panel lines to be accentuated. So you could sit and watch me do this. Might be a little boring. Don't know. But what I'm going to do is we'll do all the camouflage surfaces first. We'll come back once it's dried, and then I'll show you how we take it off, and then we'll look at doing a similar method on the white side. So back in a moment. Well, we're back. And that was a mammoth session. As you can see, all the rivet lines, panel lines have been treated with the oil wash, and yet it's kind of gone on the surfaces, but that's fine. Now, I've probably been about an hour at this. It's taken me absolutely ages, as you'd expect with the size of this aircraft. But if we're very careful, we'll flip it over, and then we can see the underside is done. Now, I haven't done every rivet line on the underside, and that's simply because there's just so many of them on the fuselage, and as we clean this off, it will naturally fall into the rivet lines. But I really wanted the wings to weather up, because they're obviously going to get a lot of spray and muck and stuff thrown up on them. So that is the oil wash laid down. Now, the underside I can't really touch too much yet because it ain't dried. I've obviously just finished putting it off, but this top surface is dry enough that we can think about how we're gonna take it off. Now, there's a number of different ways you can do it. If you were doing a simple pin wash that was solely focused on the panel lines, rivet lines, you could use a moist brush with odorless thinners to wick away the excess and leave the wash in the recesses. Another way of doing it is with cotton buds or Q-tips. What I like to do is use a little patch of kitchen paper and just generally take, I know it's rubbing it over the whole surface, but it is actually lifting it, and then back and forth in the direction airflow, and there we go. You can see it's coming away now. It's darkening the paint down, but we're not going to worry about that too much at the moment. You can keep folding the cloth over to get a cleaner piece of it, but you see, the more you work it and the more you remove the paint, and you're coming back to that original camouflage paint color, except all the rivet details are beautifully highlighted. Now, if you want to take a little more off, get a clean piece of tissue. You want to fold it into roughly 1.5 inches square. So there's about four thicknesses of tissue there. We'll get where I'm actually going to use a different thinners because this one's a little bit dirty. The other thinners I use is Winsor & Newton Sansador. Low odor solvent is what they call it. It's all the same stuff. Now what we want to do is just pop that over the top and just shake it. You don't need to turn the bottle over, you just need to shake it, and that will wick in a little bit of thinners into your towel, and then just draw it back over the surface. Go right over the trailing edge, and there you go. You can see we're starting to blend away and bringing the brightness back into the paint. But we'll also be adding a few little streaks in here and there, which is good because airplane wings get dirty, especially when they're flying out of the sea. When you've happy with the level you've done, and you can turn the towel over and just stop when you're happy. Now I'm happy with that. That's nice. The panel lines have got a nice shadow to them. The rivets stand out nicely on the paint. They did beforehand, to be honest with you. They were quite a good, prominent rivet, but it's also blended the colors together. So the next thing to do is just go over the whole model, and it's going to take a while. I mean, it took me about an hour to do the initial, and it's probably going to take me a couple hours of work to blend and work in all this oils. But when it's done, it will add a new dimension to the model. And the other beauty of working with oil paints is that when they dry totally matte. So it means we don't need to worry about putting a matte finish on this aircraft, because it's going to be matte because of the oil paints, which is good, which is what we want. It doesn't take just too long. You are going to need a good supply of kitchen towel, because you will go through quite a bit of it. There's just no other way about it. Now, I usually wear blue gloves when I'm doing this as well. Save your hands, but it'll also save, leaving fingerprints on the model. And the other beauty of using oils is you can leave it a day or so and come back to it. And if you want to take some more off, just rehydrate the oils with the solvent, and they'll move again. So it is a really, really, really good way of weathering your models. And you can see just by the tissue that we're still taking all the paint off. Always finish whatever you're doing moving in the direction of airflow. To get any streaks going back over the wing as they would normally do when in flight. When not in flight, they tend to run down over the surface, or if there's a little bit of oil cannon or whatnot, they may puddle on the surface. So you could come in and stipple, which we might do. And just be careful when you're doing this, because you can break parts off, and I have actually done that on the underside, nipped off the antenna support here. So that'll have to be glued on, but I'll only do that once I've finished all the weathering. So there we go. That's oil washing and oil weathering. I'm going to work my way over the rest of the model, and then we'll come back and we'll see it when it's actually complete, and we'll see what like it is. So we'll see you shortly. Right, so I have completely wiped down the top wing. And one thing I tend to do when I finish working with a kitchen towel is I'll come in with a really good quality microfiber cloth, and that lifts away any lint that the kitchen towel may leave, because they do tend to break down when you're rubbing away, and you can end up with paper towel fibers on your paintwork, and you really don't want that, purely because it'll leave that flecky finish on the aircraft, which is absolutely not what we need. We want a nice smooth paint finish. Now, there are areas that are quite tight to get to. This is where your Q-tip will come in, and you can come in and burnish them in with a Q-tip. And you also have to be careful, because the observant amongst you will see a bright white spot here. That is where I have broken away one of the small antennas. So I'll need to reattach that, and reattach it very, very carefully with a very small dot of extra thin, so we don't destroy the paint finish that we've worked so hard to get to. But when you're finished cleaning away the bulk of the paint, then you can take a moment to have a look and see what you think. Now, the beauty of the depth of panel lines and rivets on this aircraft is that you take the paint off the surface, but there's still quite a bit of hydrated paint in the panel lines, and that then wicks into this satin finish, wicks out, and you get this lovely weathered mottled finish where it looks like grime is in the panel lines and working its way out. Quite happy with it. And along areas along the leading edge here, you can see in the scalloped recesses where you've got the low spots between the ribs, you're getting some oil paint sticking at the back edge of the metal surface wing, which is adding to that sort of dimension to lift the aircraft away from being just a flat plane to being this three-dimensional representation of a real-life aircraft. So I'm actually really happy how this is turning out. So what I'm planning to do is I'm going to go and clear all the oil weathering away, and then we'll come back and we'll see it once it's done and once it's dried, and we can get an appreciation of the overall effect. Right, we're back, and pressed on. You can see from this pile of spent tissue here and Q-tips and a brush that we've managed to, I've managed to completely work in all the washes, and I hope you can see just how nice the aircraft is now actually looking. We've got all the panel lines nicely highlighted. We've got the underside really nicely detailed. All the rivets are just absolutely popping. Got a nice bit of weathering going on there now. All the pre-weathering we put into the paint is blended in, and all in all I'm really quite happy with it. So we're at the stage now where I'm quite confident to think about removing all the masks. We're going to attach the floats. I still have to do a little bit of cleanup on the depth charges, but that's by the by. We can get the exhaust painted, we can get in and do our exhaust staining, and then we're going to rig the aircraft for the last bit. So yeah, we're really coming on well. The last job to do will be to put on the radar antennas, because they're going to be the most fragile pieces. But I'm really happy how the model's turning out. So I'm going to clear this stuff away, and then we'll come back and we'll start taking off the masking, and we'll look at getting some of these parts attached to the kit and moving it towards the finish line. So see you in a moment.